how to create app protection policies. So given now there is BYOD scenario in your organization, so under the previous scenario, you wouldn't have much control on how it's being getting protected. But now with the app protection policies, you can actually do pretty cool stuff. So some of it could be you can actually encrypt your emails in Outlook. You can have a minimum password length or even block simple passwords. That would mean that whenever a user launches Outlook, it will come up with the prompt that please enter your passcode or PIN or whatever has been set up, and only then they would be able to access their organizational data. App protection policy is quite useful if your organization is under the sector of healthcare, which has a lot of sensitive information about the customer, their health history, or anything related to that. And there are other features such as you can restrict the users from actually saving their corporate data to their personal OneDrive or Dropbox, or even restricting them to take screenshots or copying their corporate data to any other messaging app, which I'll show you in the demo later. And then obviously you can have more control over how they view their documents and applications under the App Store. So now
before you jump into the demo, we'll just get another question, Varun. So Colin asked, in the scenario of Outlook installed on mobile device and configured to corporate settings, does this create a second instance of Outlook on the user's device along with the user's private account, or is it consolidated?
So it basically depends. So if the end user device is enrolled as a corporate owned device, then it would basically be just one app. But let's say if it's an Android enterprise work profile, it's going to create two separate profiles in the phone itself. So one is going to be the user's own personal Outlook, and then there will be another work profile Outlook with a work badge on it. So like that, the user will be able to differentiate, okay, this is my personal Outlook, and I can make the changes in there. And the other one is obviously the corporate Outlook, which you can do with that. So you can do the work profile applications protection policies for all the Microsoft apps. And once the BYOD policy kicks in, it's going to basically create two separate instances of the app.
Cool. I think that's important for the move to really making sure that no one wants two phones, no one wants their work phone, and so being able to have two instances of the same app, and having that clear delineation, I think is a really good step in the right direction. While we're answering questions, Jesse's asked, does the save as / copy paste or screenshot restriction also cover third-party apps such as screen recording software?
So in while doing the demo, I'll show you that. So in there, you basically have three options. Either you can enable all the apps in there, or you can just have the policy managed apps, which would be basically all the Microsoft apps in there. So that would be Outlook, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, or other applications that Microsoft has. Or you can set it to as none. That would mean they can't copy paste or do a backup anywhere. So again, to go to the app protection policy, you need to go under your Intune if you're still using the Intune client or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And then under client apps, you'll be able to see the app protection policy. So again, for this webinar, I have already pre-configured it, and I'll quickly give you a run through on what I have done and what impact it will have. So first of all, under the basics, I have entered the name and whatever the description is going to be, and the platform is Android. You can also set it for iOS or Windows. And then under the apps, by default, it's going to be set to as target to all device types. So basically what it would mean is it's going to target to your managed devices, your unmanaged devices, or managed apps. But again, you can drill down and then select, let's say, unmanaged or Android enterprise. Android device administrator is a legacy version of how Android enrollment used to happen. And if your organization is still following that path, then select this one as well. Once it's done, you need to select which apps you're gonna want it to be deployed it for. Again, you can come in here and then search all the Microsoft apps or the other apps that are available in here. Select it and then hit review and save. So under the app protection policy, it's divided into three parts. First is the data protection part, and then access requirements, and then the last is conditional launch. I'll give a quick run through on the device protection part. So this is what I was talking about, that would you allow your users to back up their organizational data to their personal OneDrive or not. So under send backup org data to Android backup service, you can basically block that, and that would mean they won't be able to back up their data to their local Android account or their local Gmail account that they're using. And then under the send org data to other apps, that's basically set to as none. But then policy managed apps means any of the apps that you have packaged for the Google managed play account, it would be only available for that applications itself. And if you want more granular control under that, you can come in there and then select which apps you would want to exempt. And then the other one, which Jesse was talking about, was the restrict cut, copy, and paste other functions. So this is what I was talking about. Either you could block the full feature. So that would mean that if this function is selected, you won't be able to cut, copy, paste in any of the apps, be it the policy managed or third-party apps or anything. But then you have the option of policy managed apps, which means that any of the Android enterprise apps that you have packaged, that would be available. And then under that, you would be able to set how much is the character limit that you want to allow the users to copy to. So by default, it's set to as 0. That would mean that there is no limit. If there is like a 2000 character email, they would basically be able to copy it and then send it to their OneNote or corporate OneDrive. Again, it depends on how much control you want to give it to your end users. And then you have an option of blocking or allowing the screen capture or using Google Assistant. So again, it depends upon what kind of industry you are in. If it's more like an industry where the customer information is quite sensitive and you can't have like a 1% error chance of getting the data out in the world, then you can always set it to as block. And what it would do is whenever, let's say it's about Outlook, there is an email with the customer data inside it, they try to take a screenshot, it will come up with the message on the screens, your organization does not allow you to take screenshots. And then there is something called approved keyboards. So let's say your end users might be using some third-party keyboards. You can block them or set them up. This was a new function that was added recently, and then Intune has given you the option to basically select which kind of keyboards you want to allow in there. So by default, there are a couple of default keyboards, and you can see pretty much all the Google keyboards and the Samsung voice input or the SwiftKey keyboard or the Samsung keyboard is there. And then moving on, you can always come in there and block the users to print anything from their phones. If you hit it as allow, then basically if there are any emails or let's say a SharePoint document or a Word document, they would be able to print it from their phones. And then let's say there is a link in your email. So by default, it might directly open in their own personal web browsers. So let's say you have already packaged Microsoft Edge and made it available. You can select that option, and then basically what would happen is whenever there is a email link in there, it would open Microsoft Edge in there rather than your own Opera or Chrome or anything else. And then the last one would be, do you want to allow the users to receive notifications for their org data? And then again, you can select as allow or block just for org data. And then you select hit and review and just basically check that all the policies have been done properly. I'll just hit cancel because it's already been configured. The next part is the access requirement. So what this means is once your app configuration policy has been set in, so under app protection, you can set that whenever you launch an application, the user will need to have a PIN. So that kind of adds this extra layer of security. Like let's say if the device is lost and it was an unmanaged device, it was a BYOD device. So it will basically have a separate layer of PIN on the top of your org data application. So in there, you can have a couple of customizations. So once you hit require, by default, it's set to as not required. Once you hit required, you can come in there and select what kind of pin it needs to be, a password or numeric. You can block simple pin as well. So basically that would means if you block it, they won't be able to set the pin as 0000 or 11111 or whatever. And then also set the minimum pin length that you want, and then a couple of another customizations like using fingerprint or override the pin. And then obviously you have an option of timeout. That would basically means so after 120 minutes, if there is no activity and they launch the app again, they'll again need to enter the pin in there to access their emails or any of their files. And the last one I would want to discuss is work or school account credentials for access. So that would mean that works in conjunction with PIN for access. So by default, it's set to as not required because sometimes it can become cumbersome for the end users that they have to enter a PIN and then the password for the Microsoft account. But then again, if you really want to take it a step up and then want them to enter the password for the Microsoft account, you can set it to as required. And again, you have the option of how much time you need to set it up. So with this, after 30 minutes of inactivity, if they launch the app again, they'll need to enter their Microsoft account password. And last part is the conditional launch. So this part is pre-configured when you are creating any kind of app protection policy. So what does that mean is, like, let's say the maximum pin attempts is set to as 5 by default. So let's say if the user is trying to access their Outlook and they have entered the pin incorrectly 5 times, it's gonna come up with the prompt to reset the pin of the device. But again, you can come and just change the action of that attempt. You can select wipe data, which I won't recommend because it's quite a harsh thing to do. But again, it depends upon your organization on what they need to do. And then again, something to do with their offline grace period. By default, it's set to as 720 minutes. And then after that, it's just gonna block their access. But if you don't like these kind of conditions in there, you can always delete those policies and add some app conditions as well. So you can add the minimum app version that needs to be there. So that would like prompt the users to keep updating their apps on a regular basis as well. And then that under device conditions, it's set to as if the device is rooted, then it's going to block the access permanently. They won't be able to access their device unless it's an original Android or it's unrooted. And once that is done, you basically review it again and then assign the policy to the end users. And the magic will start happening from the Intune side of part. So this is a screenshot that I took in the morning. So just to give a background, my device wasn't enrolled. It was a completely unmanaged device. So I pushed out this policy to all users enroll, and this device wasn't managed. And as soon as I launched Outlook after the policy was pushed out, the first thing I got was a prompt to set up a PIN. So by default, it was set to as a minimum requirement of 4 digits and no single pins are allowed. And then once you set that, only then you will be able to access that app. And another thing I configured was I didn't allow any of the copy paste function to work for any app which is not managed by the Intune itself. So under Samsung, this is the text messaging. I was trying to copy one of the emails and then just testing it with my manager, and this is what it comes up with. Your organization's data cannot be pasted here.